The information provided on Terminal Addiction Podcast is for educational and informational purposes only. It is not intended as a substitute for professional medical or mental health advice, diagnosis, or treatment. Always seek the advice of your physician, licensed therapist, or other qualified provider with any questions you might have regarding medical or mental health condition. Never disregard professional advice or delay seeking it because of something you heard on this podcast. The views and opinions expressed by the guests, the hosts, are their own, and they do not necessarily reflect those of any affiliated organization or institutions. While we strive to provide accurate and up-to-date information, we make no guarantee regarding the completeness, reliability, or applicability of the content discussed. Listening to this podcast does not establish provider-patient relationship. If you're experiencing a medical emergency or mental health crisis, please contact emergency services or crisis line immediately.
Welcome back to another episode of Terminal Addiction. I am Doug H.
And I'm Paul B.
How you doing, Paul?
You know what? I'm doing okay today.
It's good.
It's good. Something different, but yeah, I'm doing okay today.
Yeah, we've temporarily moved our recording space to a larger facility so that we could accommodate a third person today.
Where the hell are we?
I don't even know where we are. We're somewhere. We're in a state of mind right now. So. Paul and I are really excited. We've got another person here with us. Her name is Kayleigh. Kayleigh is part of our recovery community in this area, and she works with me at the local treatment center. So, Kayleigh, welcome.
Thanks for having me, guys. My name's Kayleigh S. I'm an addict and alcoholic. My sobriety date is October 25th, 2021. And I was in and out of the rooms for a long time. I think I started going in when I was about 19. Thought it was no big deal. I was just young, having fun, not realizing none of my other friends were in rehab over the weekends, just me. And so it took me a long time to get this. I went to a couple different treatment centers, and when the alcohol started doing too much damage, my bright thinking told me, well, I should just do Percocets. And then when Percocets started getting too bad and sending me to rehab again, well, maybe I should do heroin. And it's cheaper. So we just did that cycle for a while. And
we need to be cost effective.
Yes, we're going to do that. And then, so I ended up going to treatment in Tennessee, lots of different detoxes until, finally 2021. All my excuses ran out, and I couldn't, make myself believe that this was okay and I could keep doing this any longer. So everything just kind of crumbled, and I was ready to give up control and get sober and start listening for the first time in my life.
Well, it's good to see you.
Yeah, we're glad you're here. We talk about a lot of different stuff on this podcast. So one of the things that Paul and I have touched our podcast on is family. We know that this is a disease that affects more than just the person drinking and using, and it affects our parents, our loved ones, our friends, and Paul and Kayleigh are both parents. So we know that it affects our kids as well. I do not have kids, so I'm going to try to stay out of that part of the conversation. But I was a kid. And put my parents through a lot with my drinking and using and poor decision making, and they had to bail me out a couple of times, and I do appreciate that. But we want to talk today with Kayleigh, about some of the family dynamics that go into this.
Yeah, and my kids were older when I was in active addiction. My youngest was in his teens. My older one was in his 20s at the time. So having the perspective of smaller children and how they deal with it is just kind of a new look at it, I think, for all of us.
Yeah, I remember when I was, first coming around to meetings in this area. We live in central Ohio, if anybody's new to this. I remember being at meetings and people's kids would be there, and some of those kids were less than well behaved. They would run around and knock stuff off tables, and I just remember saying to somebody, like, why do they keep bringing their kids here if they can't behave? And one of the old timers who put some perspective in my head said, the sound of a kid at a meeting is the sound of a family that otherwise might not be together. And so it turns out I'm the asshole, and I had to change my thinking. I had to go look at page 417 there in the big book. And so I've, changed my perspective on that. I love seeing kids in meetings. I'm more than happy to go and sit and color with them or play cars or whatever. Because sometimes my purpose for being at the meeting might be so that somebody else can, be at a meeting. So I really enjoyed, when Kayleigh would bring her youngest son around, and I've gotten to know Paul's 2 kids pretty well. And again, they're older, but, I enjoy getting to see, families come back together. Working as a counselor here at a treatment center, most people don't come in here, with remarkable stories. They come in with some chaos and some casualties. And so it's really cool to be able to see, families come back together and for visitation or at meetings or get to see, the kids, the kids get better too as the parents get better. So really looking forward to, hearing what Kayleigh has to say on all this today. So.
Yeah, absolutely. So I have 2 boys. They're 7 years apart. My oldest is now 16 and the youngest is 8. And when I came into treatment in 2021, I had it in my mind that, I was going to be here for a month and then I was going to leave and get my kids back and everything was going to be great. I still had custody of my youngest, but my oldest, his dad got emergency custody of him. So in my mind, I'm going to get out of here in 30 days. I want to get him back. Everything's going to be great and perfect. Well, it didn't turn out that way. You leave treatment, you don't have any money. I had lost everything. I lost my apartment, my job, everything. Just one relapse took everything from me. And, so we had to go to court, for that. And I didn't have money for an attorney or to fight that. And then I kind of realized, I'm being selfish anyways. I did all that. My oldest saw me, using and all messed up on the couch. And so there's one time he had to call my mother and said, mom's using again. I need you to come pick up my brother, which, I didn't know that till after I got sober, which was a pretty, horrible thing to learn. And, so I was like, what? I'm being selfish. He's at a new school now, and I need to think about him. And, so I was really worried about, how do I repair my relationship with both of my boys, because my youngest he's insane, and I remember going to, my appointments here and talking to the doctors here at the treatment center. And I'm like, the principals are going to call me every day with my youngest son. Like he's feral. And, and so I just thought this kid was going to be just trouble. Right. But when I got better and I just, kept doing the next right thing and kept showing up, and I was dependable, and he knew what to expect out of me now. And we had rules and bedtimes and schedules, and he just turned into a completely different child. When I got better, it seemed like everybody around me got better. And it wasn't an overnight thing. It took some time, because when I was, using and stuff, and in my head, I was this great mom because they had everything, they wanted, and I bought them everything. But I wasn't spending time with them or teaching them things. So, my youngest, we go to his kindergarten assessment. He didn't know any of his ABCs. And so he ended up having to do, kindergarten twice, get him caught up. And then, I also had to take him to the dentist and get about $1,300 worth of dental work done. Because I wasn't making sure he was brushing his teeth. And to be honest with you, I never thought about brushing his teeth. I was off doing what I wanted to do. And you get sober and your mind clears up and you're like, oh my gosh, I got all this stuff I got to take care of now. But I stayed sober and I, did what I needed to do and took him to his appointments and got him all taken care of. And now all that's behind us. And Cash, he's just the coolest kid now. And his teachers always have the best things to say about him. Every season he's involved in a sport. He loves sports. He doesn't get in trouble. He's fantastic. But my oldest, though, he's been tougher, which I guess makes sense because he was older and, saw more. My youngest, he was 4 when I relapsed. So after I got sober for a little while, he would always say things like, Mom, you remember when you were crazy? Or why did you run over Dad that one day? And I'm like, oh Lord, like we need to make some new memories, because I could just imagine what he's telling his teachers at school. And so, luckily that happened. And I don't think, to this day, he doesn't remember any of that stuff. We got good memories in place now that, took over that area. But, my oldest, I can only imagine, how confusing and stressful and upsetting that must have been for him during that time when, you're in those preteen years, your body's changing, you already got enough angst in the world, and then you're watching your mother, destroy herself and act all crazy and, passed out on the couch. And so he held a lot of resentment. And, so now I'm, trying to repair my relationship with him as, he lives with his dad who lives 45 minutes away. And that's tough because he's 45 minutes away, and to go, out there on, Wednesday evening during rush hour traffic, the whole time spent in the car, you don't get time with him, so it's really hard to try to repair that. On the other token, though, I'm glad it worked out that way, because it would have been really hard to stay sober and go to my meetings and have, two totally different kids and take care of their needs, as well as me stay sober. And I'm glad that we kind of had that space, because it probably would have been horrible having him back home and now everybody's fighting and angry at each other again, so this space was definitely needed. So and to this, almost 5 years sober, we're still working on that relationship. We had some good time, where I remember I texted Doug this day. It was a year and a half before he finally texted me and said, "Hey, do you want to pick me up and go shopping?" And this was the best thing, that's ever happened. Teenagers are tough because they don't, my oldest is like the strong, silent type. I know something's going on, but he doesn't want to tell me. And so, I'm always trying to get it out of him, and then it seems like he gets mad. And so it's just kind of this cat and mouse game. Like, I don't have a book on how to do this, guys. So I just, it's the best that you can do. And, it seemed like things were going good, and we had, spent some more time together and had to sit down at breakfast where I kind of explained things, because I think he has trouble separating the disease from who I am. Mm-hmm. How do you have this child that you love and do all these horrible things? He doesn't understand that, that wasn't me. That was the disease, and I was a sick person, right? It wasn't because I didn't love him or anything. I love him more than anything. I didn't know what I was doing. I did the best I could with what I knew at the time. And now I try to make it better every day by doing the next right thing and staying sober. So, I thought things were getting better. And then, past year, maybe 6 months ago, he kind of just texted me out of the blue, really, and was, "Hey, I'm mad at you. I need a break from you. I don't want to talk to you," anything like that. So I haven't really had much contact with him since. I've sent him some texts, "Hey, I'm here if you need anything." But, the only thing I can't control, where he's at and whatever journey he is on right now. I can only control myself. And that means I can control how I show up in his life. So when he is ready to, reach out and have that relationship again, I want to make sure I'm sober. I'm there to listen and be supportive and be that parent that he's always needed. So I'll be here when he's ready. So more to come.
It's tough because males don't really mature until they're in their mid-20s. My younger son, he was 18 when I came into treatment. My older son was in his late 20s when I came into treatment. So, he's got a good understanding of what I do. He comes to meetings occasionally. My younger son has come to one meeting in the last 6 years. But being a little older, they do grasp it differently than the little ones do. I remember those teenage years with my older son. Had I gone through treatment at that time, he probably still wouldn't talk to me because we had just a different relationship. He and I had a very love-hate relationship during his teen years, where my younger son, we were always just kind of paced at the same, he wanted to do whatever I was doing, and we got along great. The kids are so different.
Mm-hmm. And at that age, they know everything, right? So you can't tell them anything. I think we really would have benefited from some maybe like a family session, stuff like that. I tried to get him to do an Al-Anon meeting. I was like, or an Alateen. I was like, "Hey, you got one right there. There's a women's meeting. We can do." No, the problem's you. The typical stuff that they say. So I'm like, okay, he's not ready. I can't make him be ready. It's his journey. And I'll just have to show him the same grace he showed me there for a while. So
yeah, and I think that's excuse me, that's really the only thing we can do. Just having done this, professionally now for a few years. I know that children of alcoholics or children of addicts, they experience higher levels of stress just living with an addict or an alcoholic. They have more anxiety. They have a bunch of guilt. because they don't really understand what's going on. And as kids, I can remember back being younger, anytime that I would see my parents fight, I would think, it's my fault. And so I know kids have this, these consequences of our using, whether it's, long-term behavioral issues, some social issues, they have their own personal emotional issues. And you're talking about teenagers, and being a teenager is hard enough. And you throw an alcoholic or an addict parent on top of that, and it's got to make their lives really hard. I remember I'm an only child, and I just remember when I was going through a lot of my early stuff, 16 to 21, say, my parents didn't know what to do. They had never experienced anything like what I was putting them through. And so, they tried the tough love thing, and they tried throwing money at the situation, and put me up in the basement a couple of times. But I remember watching my parents go through it, and they didn't really have any answers. And it wasn't until I came into treatment and I put together some sobriety. I saw them, having some support, whether it was meeting other parents of kids that were going through stuff. I know my mom went to Al-Anon for a while. And I noticed when, like you were saying, Kayleigh, when I started getting better, other people started getting better. And I think it's because they don't have to worry about us quite as much. Kids, have a hard enough time in this world as it is with, social media. And I've just heard the nightmares about public school and private school for that matter. These kids are growing up in a completely different time than when we were coming up. And so to try to navigate the waters of having a parent who's using, I can't imagine, how the stress that puts on them. But I know, what Kayleigh's saying is, really the truest thing is making sure that we are the best version of ourselves, so that if and when these people come back into our lives, we have something better to show them. Watching you hang out with your youngest Cash, I remember when you first started coming around, bringing him to meetings, he's a little hellion, but he's a good kid. And I think, that was pretty evident to me early on. And, as you got soberer, he started getting a little bit more mature, and you brought him into work a couple times, and I've seen him, at meetings, and he's just this really cool kid. And I don't know your older one, all that well. All I've really done is hear stories, but, he sounds like a good kid too. And it just sounds like he's trying to figure all this out, because, he was 10 when you started going through all the stuff, and
12, 13 or something like that.
And so those are hard enough years as it is. So I really do hope, and I have some faith as well that the longer you're doing this, and the more he can see that his mom's different, hopefully he'll come back around. But I have seen the big turnaround in your younger son. So. I really appreciate you coming in and talking about this stuff. We've got a lot more we want to cover, but I'm going to turn it over to Paul real quick.
Yeah, so one of the areas that I want to cover is kind of handling it from the other side. My mom was an alcoholic as well. And I was in my mid-40s when she went into treatment. Last night, I had to help a family member get into treatment. And we deal with addiction not just in ourselves, but in other people. And how we deal with it, especially as recovering alcoholics, how do we deal with that other person in our family that's going through this? I think can be tough. I certainly open to any thoughts that either of you have on that subject.
Yeah, I remember, I have a pretty small family and pretty tight knit, and as I was getting older and going through treatment and having more honest, open discussions with family members, found out that my I guess it would be my great grandmother on my mom's side. Everybody talked about either she died of liver disease or kidney failure or something. As we poked around, I think we found out that maybe it was more alcohol related. But back then they didn't have, treatment. They didn't have, all the access to the information that we do. We didn't, I think it was probably way more stigmatized back then, especially for a female. So I think everybody just kind of swept it under the rug. It was something that nobody really wanted to talk about. And I just remember, talking with my mom and my aunts and my grandma when she was still around. Some of the warning signs were there, but I don't know that anybody was educated enough to really pick up on what was going on. And so I do know that having family members and my uncle passed away of this disease back in 2016. And I remember, I was still drinking and using and in and out of treatment and in and out of recovery. And he and I got to go to some meetings together. And so I got to know a different side of him before he passed. But I remember seeing how hard that was on my aunt and on my mom and my dad and my grandmother, because nobody really had any answers. He was a nurse practitioner and had gotten caught up with some legal stuff and, had to go to treatment. And I remember there was like a monitoring agreement that he had to do. And I remember when he was clean and sober, man, he was so much fun, and he was a lot of fun to be around. He's a funny guy. He's a smart guy. But when he would go out, it would take a toll on everybody in the family. So I do remember having some glimpses of that. But as I get older and the longer I'm around this program and the more education I pick up, I understand that it really is a family disease. We don't have, I don't think, enough conversations about this stuff. I think it's hard to talk about. I think there's just an awkwardness to it. But I think when I was able to really sit down and start talking to my family about, what I was doing, what I was going through, I wasn't giving them the super grimy details of everything, but I think they started to understand, more or at least accept it a little bit more when me and my uncle were both clean and sober, because it was a different time in the family. And I remember being on vacation with him one time, and he was using Oxycontin, and he was a pretty heavy user, and then drinking on top of it. And I just remember it just wasn't the same. After I understood, it made more of maybe like some of the stuff that I'd heard or seen growing up make a little bit more sense. But I just remember there was a brief time when he and I were clean and sober together, and we went to some meetings together when I was out there visiting. And everything was just different. There was just a calmness to the family, and I'm noticing that more and more now. I make it a point to call my mom and my dad regularly, go down and visit them, and our relationship is just better. It's never been ideal. It's never been perfect, but I've got some things that I can do with each of them, and things I can do with the both of them together, where I can have a relationship with them as they get a little bit older. So, I know from personal experience that time and abstinence heals a lot of wounds.
Yeah, usually 40 miles into the woods, 40 miles out. It's not going to happen overnight. I had the same thing with my family. My grandmother, alcoholic, and she died from this disease. And then my brother right now, has been going through it. Every memory I have of my brother, I can't remember him not having a beer in his hand for as long as I've known him. But over the years, he didn't really get in too much trouble. He still had the house, the job. He's got 2 daughters, and he was a good dad. But it caught up to him like it always does. And so now he went from having this a house, great job, to now he's at a homeless shelter, no vehicle. Has not paid child support in years, hasn't talked to my nieces. He's just, totally consumed by this disease. And for me, I think what helped me get sober was when, everybody stopped enabling me. Because you baby the alcoholic, you bury the alcoholic.
Sure.
Right? So, me and my mom, I was standing on her porch, and she said, "I will take your kids and you will never come back into this house." And I relapsed, and so I showed up at her house, and she wasn't lying. She did not let me back in this house. I'm like, oh man, I'm not going to do good on the streets, I don't think I can do that. So that's when things started. Things started clicking for me, and so I kind of knew I needed to take that approach with my brother, because if I made him comfortable, then he wasn't going to want to change. So this past year, I get a call that he was in jail. I got a DUI and all this stuff, and my mom at that point had let him move back in for a second time. And I'm like, what are you doing? You already went through this with me. This is not the way to do it, right? And So she's like, okay, well, I'm going to kick him out when he gets out of jail. His stuff will be outside. He can't be out there. And I feel for her on that. I can't imagine what it'd be like to have to make that decision with your kids. And I pray to God I never have to go through that. But she did it, which was good. And he calls me. Well, I don't know where to go. And I'm like, you're not coming to my house. Here's the address to the local homeless shelter, right? You just come sleep on my couch, eat my food. Then there's no consequences, and you'll keep doing what you want to do. And so, he's still been out there. I don't know what's going on with him. We used to be really close. And I think a couple days ago, somebody told me that they saw him walking down the street with a book bag. And it's mind boggling. And it's interesting to see from the other side, because that's what everybody saw with me. So.
Yeah, matter of fact, last night I was talking to a family member, and as we were talking, I let her say it, but the conversation came up, maybe we should just let him go to jail. And I said, you know what? Sometimes we pray for people to go to jail because, it's a wake up call.
Nudge from the judge.
Yeah, absolutely. We coddle each other. We're codependent, and it doesn't do any good. It just feeds the addiction even more.
And I think some people just really forget the big picture on this. Like, this will kill you. You will die, And so I know Doug said it a couple times, I don't care about your feelings. I care about your life, So that's fine if you're mad at me. That's fine if I have to give you tough love and you're mad at me, because maybe it'll make you uncomfortable enough to go seek help and go do something about it. No.
Yeah, I remember I was at a meeting back in like 2013 or 14, and I was bitching and complaining about, somebody wasn't treating me right, and I wasn't being understood. And I remember this, he was an old timer at that time. His name was Andre. He just stood up at the meeting and he said, "Fuck your feelings." And I was so offended because I didn't understand. It shut me up. It gave me something to think about. And then after the meeting, he pulled me aside and he explained what Kayleigh was talking about. He said, I'm not here to save your feelings. I'm here to save your life.
Yeah.
And that was a real eye-opening thing. So that was, 13 years ago. And I still remember that. And I still use that as an example because, the only thing that really got me clean and sober were consequences. And it wasn't until I was able to put my pride and ego aside, which I still have, but it wasn't until I was able to put that aside and see how I really affected other people, the torment and chaos I was causing in their lives. And I was able to find my part in everything. And working through a 12-step program, you really do, if you're working it the right way, at least I did, I found a lot of things that I thought were other people's faults. But then I was able to look at it a little bit deeper, and find my part in it. And I wasn't, always the nicest or the kindest or the most friendly, or I was always looking for a way to manipulate a situation. I was a liar, a cheat, and a thief. And sometimes my part in it is I allowed this person into my life. And so Andre saying that to me for a few minutes really hurt my feelings. Mm-hmm. But then I understood why he said, fuck your feelings, because it wasn't gonna help for him to just tell me everything was gonna be okay or that everything's gonna be fine. And so, I know Kayleigh and I, working here at the treatment center, we try to take that approach with some of the patients, but I know not everybody is always ready to hear those kinds of things. And the last thing I want to do is scare somebody out of treatment or scare somebody out of the room. So learn how to be tactile, more tactful, with some of the things that I say and how I package some of the things. And sometimes it's better to say something to somebody, one-on-one rather than in a group setting. But I just remember, going back to that, and I guess I'm turning into a big book thumper here. I never thought I was, but I like to go and pull some stuff out of the book from time to time. And page 67 in the AA Big Book, they were sick like us. We asked God to help show us the same tolerance, pity, and patience that we would cheerfully grant a sick friend. When a person offended, we said to ourselves, "This is a sick man. How can I be helpful to him? God save me from being angry, and thy will be done." And for me, that I need to remember that, especially working here in a treatment center, because not everybody that comes in gets it. And I take that, into my family because, my parents are my parents and I love them dearly. But we always don't see eye to eye on things. So sometimes, the argument or the retaliation or the fighting, that's just going to make things worse. So the best thing I can do sometimes is just, excuse myself from the situation, take some deep breaths and go back and talk to some other people before I, retaliate out of emotion and instinct and momentum. Because if I can slow down and I can take a step back and I can try to understand where somebody's coming from, I tend to, come back to the situation a lot more level-headed and clear-headed. And I think that was, some of the stuff that was missing in my family is they didn't understand that stuff. They didn't know this stuff. They didn't know to, not throw gasoline on the fire. They were just, grasping at straws and trying the best they could. And it wasn't until, I wasn't welcome back at the house for a period of time, that it really got my attention. It wasn't until they stopped bailing me out. It wasn't until they, put down some boundaries, that I was able to look and go, oh shit, if this is, the situation, maybe I need to take a look at maybe my part in it. So, I think coming from, a family that's pretty tight and pretty small, there wasn't a lot of people to deflect attention to. So, now I really do think that my parents and I have a much better relationship. And I think that relationship with them allows me to go out and have better relationships with other people in my life.
Well, I want to continue this conversation. We're going to split this in 2 episodes, if that's okay with you guys.
Sounds good.
And so come back in 2 weeks and you'll get to hear the second part of this.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks. The views and opinions expressed in this podcast are those of the hosts and guests and do not necessarily reflect those of any affiliated organization. This content is for informational purposes only and is not intended for professional advice. Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed today's episode, be sure to subscribe, leave a review, and share it with a friend. Until next time.